What is the true measure of a man's wealth? Is it the number in his bank account or the size of his home? Or is it found in the quiet moments of sacrifice that no one ever sees? For Ethan Cole, a single father whose world had shrunk to the size of his 6-year-old daughter and their next meal, wealth was a concept from another life. He never imagined that his last sandwich, split in three on a weathered park bench, would become the most valuable investment he ever made. An act of kindness that would unknowingly collide with a world of unimaginable power and privilege, changing his life and the life of a lonely little girl forever. This is the story of how one man's hunger revealed the poverty of a billionaire's soul. The rumble in Ethan Cole's stomach was a familiar, unwelcome friend. It had been his constant companion for the better part of a year, a low, growling reminder of bills stacked on the counter, of the second-hand shoes on his daughter's feet, and of the ever-present gap between what he earned and what they needed. He pressed a hand against his abdomen, a useless gesture, and forced a smile as he watched his 6-year-old Lily chase a flurry of pigeons near the park fountain. Her laughter, light and pure, was the only thing that truly filled him up these days. It was the fuel that got him out of bed for a 4 a.m. shift hauling drywall, and the melody that soothed him to sleep in their cramped, one-bedroom apartment. "Daddy, look! I almost caught one!" she squealed, her pigtails bouncing as she skidded to a halt. "You're too fast for them, Peanut," he called back, his voice hoarse from construction dust. Life hadn't always been this tight. Just 2 years ago, Ethan was a promising junior architect at a respected firm. He and his wife, Sarah, had a life mapped out. A small house with a yard, another baby, weekend trips to the coast. But their carefully drawn blueprint had been erased by a single brutal word: cancer. Sarah's fight was brave but brief, and it had consumed everything: their savings, their plans, their future. When it was over, Ethan was left with a mountain of medical debt, a broken heart, and a little girl with her mother's eyes. The architecture firm had to make cuts during a downtown, and the junior staff were the first to go. Now his skilled hands, once used to draft elegant designs, were calloused and sore from manual labor. Every dollar was a victory, every expense a strategic battle. He reached into his worn backpack and pulled out their lunch. It was the same as yesterday and the day before. One sandwich, peanut butter, and a thin scraping of jelly on the cheapest store-brand bread. He'd learned to slice it with surgical precision. One slightly larger half for Lily, the smaller half for him. Today, however, his own hunger was a physical ache. He hadn't eaten since a cup of black coffee 12 hours ago. "Lunchtime, Peanut," he called. Lily came running, her face flushed with joy. She scrambled onto the bench beside him. "Is it jelly today?" "The finest vintage," he said with a wink, carefully unwrapping the wax paper. The smell of peanut butter, so simple, made his stomach clench with a fresh wave of hunger. He handed Lily her portion, and she began to eat with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of a child. He watched her for a moment, his own half of the sandwich sitting on his lap. He could make it last. A few small bites now, save the rest for dinner. Lily would have the leftover pasta from last night. It would be enough. It always had to be enough. He was about to take that first, long-awaited bite when a small voice beside him, no louder than a whisper, said, "Excuse me." Ethan turned. Sitting at the far end of the long bench was a little girl, perhaps a year or two older than Lily. She was dressed in clothes that screamed of money, a pristine navy blue pea coat, polished leather shoes, and a small designer-looking backpack at her feet. Her dark hair was held back with a velvet bow, but her face was pale and her big brown eyes were fixed on the sandwich in his hand. She looked utterly out of place, a porcelain doll left in a sandbox, and she was alone. "Hello there," Ethan said gently, scanning the area. There was no frantic parent in sight. "Are you lost?" The girl shook her head, but didn't look away from his lunch. "No, I'm just waiting." Lily, ever the social butterfly, piped up with her mouth full. "My name's Lily. What's yours?" "Clara," the girl replied softly. "Are you having a picnic too, Clara?" Lily asked. Clara's gaze finally dropped to her own lap. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "No, my..." My snack got lost. Ethan's heart gave a lurch. He knew that look. It was the quiet shame of not having something. He'd seen it in the eyes of other men at the temp agency, in his own reflection. But to see it on the face of a child, one so clearly accustomed to having everything, was jarring. "Oh," was all he said. He looked down at his meager half of a sandwich. It was barely 4 bites. It was the only food he would have until morning. The rumble in his stomach became a roar. Then he looked at Lily, happily munching away, oblivious. And he looked at Clara, this lost little girl whose polished shoes couldn't hide the hunger in her eyes. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an instinct, the same one that had guided him since Sarah was gone. "You take care of the children first." "Well," Ethan said, tearing his precious half sandwich into 2 equal pieces. "It's a good thing I made too much today." He held out a piece to the little girl. "I'm Ethan, and I'd be happy to share." Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief in them. She hesitated, looking from the sandwich to his face, as if trying to understand the terms of the transaction. In her world, nothing was ever free. "It's okay," he said with a kind smile. "We're happy to share. Aren't we, Peanut?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy makes the best sandwiches." Slowly, as if accepting a royal decree, Clara reached out and took the small piece of bread. Her fingers were cold. She brought it to her lips and took a bite. As she chewed, her shoulders, which had been tense and high, began to relax. A look of profound relief washed over her face. Ethan watched her, his own hunger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a dull, aching sympathy. He had no idea who this child was or where she came from. He only knew that in this small shared moment of breaking bread, on a lonely park bench, they were all just 3 hungry people. He could never have known that this simple act of kindness, this quarter of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the carefully constructed world of one of the most powerful women in the country. Clara ate the small piece of sandwich with a delicacy that seemed at odds with her obvious hunger. She took small, deliberate bites, savoring each one as if it were a gourmet meal. For Ethan, it was a humbling sight. He and Lily were used to making do, to stretching simple things to their limits. But for this child, the simple taste of peanut butter and jelly seemed to be a revelation. "Thank you," she mumbled through a mouthful, her voice still quiet. "You're very welcome," Ethan replied, taking a small bite of his own, even smaller piece. The bread was dry and the peanut butter stuck to the roof of his mouth, but it was sustenance. "So, who are you waiting for, Clara?" Clara swallowed, her eyes darting towards the park entrance before quickly looking away. "My mother. She's in a meeting. My nanny was supposed to watch me, but we had a disagreement." The word disagreement sounded so formal, so adult. Ethan suspected it was a childish euphemism for a tantrum that had resulted in her running off. He dealt with a few of those from Lily himself. "I see," he said, not wanting to press too hard. "Does your mother know you're here?" Clara shook her head, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "She thinks I'm with Miss Albright, but Miss Albright she's not very fun. She just looks at her phone." She looked at Lily, who was now trying to balance a crust on her nose. "Your dad plays with you." It wasn't a question, it was an observation, tinged with a note of longing that twisted something in Ethan's chest. "He's the bestest player in the whole world, Lily announced, the crust tumbling off her nose. "We play Lava Monster, and he always lets me win." A tiny smile touched Clara's lips. "Lava Monster?" "Yeah, the ground is hot lava, and you have to stay on the benches or the play set, and Daddy is the Lava Monster," Lily explained, her hands gesturing wildly. Ethan chuckled. "It's a classic of the Cole household." He looked at Clara. Her coat was immaculate, not a speck of dirt on it. He couldn't imagine her scrambling over playground equipment to escape imaginary lava. Her life seemed to be one of velvet bows and quiet waiting. As if on cue, the sky, which had been a placid, hazy gray, began to darken. A cool wind whipped through the park, rustling the leaves and carrying the distant scent of rain. Ethan looked up, a knot of worry tightening in his gut. "Looks like a storm's rolling in," he said, beginning to pack away their wax paper into his bag. "We should probably get going, Peanut." He turned to Clara. Your mom, does she have your phone number? Or can we call your nanny? Clara's composure finally began to crumble. Her lower lip trembled. I don't have a phone, and I don't want to call Ms. Albright. She'll be angry. Her eyes welled up with tears. Mommy's going to be so mad at me. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the concrete path. Lily, sensitive to any sign of distress, reached out and put her small hand on Clara's arm. Don't cry, she said softly. My daddy can fix it. He can fix anything. Ethan's heart ached. He wished that were true. He couldn't even fix the leak in their own kitchen sink. He stood up, shrugging off his thin, worn jacket. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Okay, here's the plan, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. He draped the jacket over the two girls, huddling them together. We're not going to leave you here alone, Clara. We'll walk over to that security office by the main gate. They can help find your mom, and she won't be mad. She'll just be happy you're safe. Clara looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with uncertainty. In her world, adults were figures of authority, drivers, nannies, tutors, and a mother she only saw in scheduled increments. They were people who gave instructions, not comfort. The uncomplicated kindness from this stranger, a man who smelled faintly of sawdust and peanut butter, was something she didn't know how to process. He offered her a hand. Come on, we'll be your adventure buddies until your mom gets here. Hesitantly, she slipped her small gloved hand into his large calloused one. Her touch was surprisingly firm, as if she were holding on for dear life. Together, the three of them, the struggling single father, his cheerful daughter, and the lost little billionaire, scurried through the increasingly heavy rain, a makeshift family huddled under a threadbare jacket. Ethan's stomach was still empty. His own quarter of a sandwich was long gone, a fleeting memory. But as he felt the two small hands clutching his, a different kind of emptiness, one he hadn't even realized was there, began to feel a little less vast. He was worried about the consequences, about getting involved, about the time it was taking from a potential evening gig. But looking down at the two trusting faces under his jacket, he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had no way of knowing that miles away, in a steel and glass tower that scraped the sky, the world of Clara's mother was erupting into absolute chaos. The disagreement was no longer a trivial matter. It had become a crisis, and a very powerful, very frightened woman, Isabella Romano, did not tolerate mistakes. Her empire, Romano Enterprises, a global leader in technology and logistics, was built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency and flawless execution. From her penthouse office on the 80th floor, she could see the entire city splayed out below her like a circuit board, a complex system she understood and, in many ways, controlled. She was a woman forged in grief and pressure. Her husband, the brilliant and beloved founder of the company, Marco, had died in a boating accident 3 years prior, leaving her not only a widow but the heir to a corporate dynasty. Many had expected her to sell. Instead, she had taken the reins with a ferocity that stunned the board and silenced her critics. She worked 18-hour days, devoured data, and made decisions with the cold precision of an algorithm. Her life was a fortress of control, scheduled down to the minute. Her daughter, Clara, was the one variable she couldn't quite manage. Isabella loved her with a fierce, protective instinct, but love was an emotion she often expressed through provisions rather than presence. The best schools, the best tutors, the best nannies. Clara was surrounded by the best of everything, except her mother. Isabella glanced at the clock. 4:15 p.m. She was in the middle of a tense video conference with the board in Tokyo, dissecting quarterly earnings. Her assistant buzzed through on the intercom. Ms. Romano, I apologize for the interruption, but Ms. Albright is on line 1. She says it's an emergency. Isabella's jaw tightened. An emergency with her was usually a scheduling conflict or a complaint about Clara's refusal to practice her Mandarin. Tell her I'll call her back in 10 minutes, she said, her eyes still locked on the financial projections on her screen. Ma'am, she was crying. She said, Clara is missing. The world tilted. The numbers on the screen blurred into meaningless squiggles. The voices from Tokyo faded into a dull hum. Isabella felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a feeling she hadn't experienced since the police had shown up at her door 3 years ago. Gentlemen, she said, her voice dangerously calm as she terminated the call without waiting for a reply. "We will have to reschedule." She stabbed the button for line 1. "Eliza, what is the meaning of this?" Miss Albright's hysterical voice flooded the line. "I'm so sorry, Miss Romano. We were at the park, near the carousel. I looked down at my phone for just a single second, I swear, to confirm your dinner reservation, and when I looked up, she was gone. I've been searching everywhere for the last hour." An hour. Her daughter had been missing for an hour. Isabella's carefully constructed control shattered. The CEO vanished, replaced by a terrified mother. "You lost my daughter," she whispered, the words laced with ice. "I'm at the park now, with the park security. We're looking, I swear." Isabella hung up. Her movements became sharp, efficient, terrifyingly focused. She pressed a button on her desk that connected directly to her head of personal security, a formidable ex-Mossad agent named Marcus Vance. "Marcus, code Amethyst," she said. It was the code they had established for the unthinkable, a threat to Clara. "Understood," came his immediate clipped reply. There was no question, no hesitation. Within 60 seconds, Marcus was in her office, his tablet already displaying a satellite map of Maple Creek Park. "Team is en route. Local PD has been alerted discreetly. We have a photo being distributed to all park staff." What was she wearing? A navy pea coat, dark jeans, a velvet bow in her hair, Isabella recited, the details feeling surreal. She was pacing now, a caged tiger in her glass box, the sprawling city below a mockery of her power. She could move markets with a single phone call, but she couldn't find her own child. Guilt clawed at her throat. This morning, they'd had an argument. Clara had been in the school play, a small role as a tree, but she had been so excited. Isabella had promised she'd be there. But a last-minute crisis with a German acquisition had arisen, and she had sent Miss Albright with a video camera instead. "You're always in a meeting," Clara had shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You love your company more than me." "That's not true, Clara," Isabella had said, her voice strained. "Everything I do is for you." "No, it's not," Clara had cried before running to her room. Now those words echoed in the silent office, each one a shard of glass in Isabella's heart. She ran away, Isabella thought. This isn't a kidnapping. This is my fault. "Get me eyes everywhere, Marcus," she commanded, her voice shaking with a rage born of pure fear. "Check every security camera in a 10-block radius. I want every entrance and exit of that park locked down. I want a facial recognition scan running against every public feed in the city. Mobilize everyone. I don't care what it costs. Find her." Marcus nodded, his fingers flying across his tablet. "Already happening, ma'am." He paused, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "We'll find her." Isabella walked to the immense floor-to-ceiling window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She looked down at the city, at the thousands of anonymous people scurrying below like ants. One of them was her daughter, and somewhere down there, in the rain-slicked streets and darkening parks, a man with nothing to his name was holding her child's hand, completely unaware that the most powerful woman in the city was about to turn the world upside down to find them. The park security office was a small, stuffy room that smelled of damp wool and instant coffee. A kindly, overweight officer named Gus took down their information with a slow, methodical hand. Lily, sensing the gravity of the situation, sat quietly on a plastic chair, while Clara huddled close to Ethan, her earlier fear replaced by a quiet apprehension. "Don't you worry, little miss," Gus said, giving Clara a reassuring smile. 9 times out of 10, a lost kid is found within 20 minutes. Your mom is probably looking for you right now. Ethan felt a pang of unease. He'd given Gus his own name and phone number. He explained that he'd found Clara alone on the bench, and with the rain starting, thought it best to bring her to security. He was a concerned citizen, a good Samaritan, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered about how this could look. A scruffy-looking man in work boots with a well-dressed child who wasn't his. People jumped to conclusions. To distract the girls and himself, he dug back into his backpack. All he had left were 2 slightly crushed oatmeal cookies Sarah had taught him how to bake, his one culinary specialty. They were supposed to be Lily's dessert tonight. "Operation Cookie is a go," he whispered, breaking each cookie in half and giving a piece to Lily and Clara. Clara accepted the offering, her eyes still wide and watchful. She took a bite, and a genuine, surprised smile lit up her face. "This is good. Daddy's a secret baker," Lily said proudly. "It's nothing special," Ethan demurred. "Just oats and brown sugar." "My mother has a chef," Clara stated simply. Not as a boast, but as a fact. "He makes things with foam and swirls. They look pretty, but they don't taste like this." The three of them sat there munching on the simple homemade cookies as the rain lashed against the windowpane. In that small, fluorescent-lit room, the vast differences in their worlds seemed to dissolve. They weren't rich and poor. They were just a man and two little girls, finding a moment of comfort on a stormy afternoon. Clara began to open up, her voice losing its timid edge. She talked about her school, her pony, and her favorite books. She listened with rapt attention as Lily described their tiny apartment, her collection of colorful rocks, and the stray cat they'd named Shadow, who lived in their alley. Ethan watched them, a strange mix of sadness and warmth filling his chest. Clara had everything a child could ever want, but her face lit up with an almost desperate curiosity as she heard about Lily's simple, love-filled life. It was clear to him that this little girl was profoundly lonely. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a contractor. "Need you on the Miller site tomorrow, 5 a.m. Don't be late." A wave of relief washed over him. Rent was due in a week. He needed that job. He just had to be clear of this situation by then. Suddenly, Officer Gus's radio crackled to life, a squall of static and official-sounding jargon. Gus listened, his eyebrows shooting up. He looked from the radio to Clara, his expression shifting from folksy concern to one of acute alarm. "Son," he said, his voice low and serious as he addressed Ethan, "you're going to need to stay right here. Don't go anywhere." Before Ethan could ask why, the door to the small office burst open. Two men in dark, identical suits and earpieces filled the doorway, their eyes scanning the room with a cold, professional intensity. They looked at Lily, then at Ethan, and then their gazes locked onto Clara. "Target is secure," one of them spoke into his wrist. "Target?" Ethan's blood ran cold. Clara shrank behind him, grabbing onto his leg. Lily, startled by the sudden intrusion, began to cry. Ethan instinctively moved in front of the girls, placing a protective hand on each of their shoulders. "Who are you people?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the frantic pounding of his heart. "This is a child, not a target." The men ignored him completely. Their focus was solely on Clara. A third figure appeared in the doorway, and this one made the suited men look like bellhops. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with an aura of contained lethality. It was Marcus Vance. "Clara," Marcus said, his voice softer than Ethan would have expected, but still firm. "Your mother sent us. You're safe now." At the mention of her mother, Clara's face crumpled. The adventure was over. Reality was crashing back in. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her grip tightening on Ethan's pants. "She's going to be so mad." Marcus took a step forward. Ethan held his ground. "Just take it easy," Ethan said, raising a hand. "You're scaring them." Marcus's eyes finally settled on Ethan, and his gaze was like a physical weight. It was a look of instant, dismissive assessment. He saw the worn clothes, the calloused hands, the cheap backpack. He saw a nobody, a potential threat, a complication. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "I need you to step away from the child." "He's not a sir, he's my friend," Clara cried out, her voice ringing with defiance. "He gave me a sandwich." The statement hung in the air, nonsensical and yet profoundly important. Marcus paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. A sandwich? But there was no time for clarification. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, culminating in the screech of tires on wet asphalt just outside. The door swung open again, and this time, a whirlwind of icy fury and Chanel No. 5 swept into the room. Isabella Romano stood there, drenched from the rain, her impeccable hair plastered to her forehead, her designer suit soaked through. But her eyes were blazing. They swept past the officers, past her own security, and landed on the scene. Her daughter, her precious Clara, hiding behind the legs of a complete stranger. The terror she had felt for hours instantly curdled into a hot, possessive rage. She didn't see a kind man who had helped. She saw a threat who had her child. "Get away from my daughter," she hissed, her voice low and trembling with menace. The full weight of her power, the force of a woman who could buy and sell entire city blocks, was now directed squarely at Ethan Cole. And in that moment, Ethan realized his simple act of kindness had dragged him into a storm far bigger and more dangerous than the one raging outside. The small security office suddenly felt airless, the tension so thick Ethan could taste it. Isabella Romano advanced into the room, her presence sucking all the oxygen with her. Her eyes, the same deep brown as her daughter's but hard as polished stone, were locked on Ethan. "I said, get away from her," she repeated, her voice ablade. Ethan, feeling Clara tremble behind him, slowly straightened up. He was acutely aware of his shabby appearance under the sterile fluorescent lights, his muddy boots, his frayed jeans, the grease stain on his sleeve. He was a ghost from a world she didn't know existed. "Ma'am, please," he said, keeping his voice as even as possible. "Your daughter was lost. I just brought her here to wait for you." Isabella let out a short, incredulous laugh that held no humor. "You brought her here? Or she followed you? What did you offer her? Candy? A toy?" The accusation struck him like a physical blow, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "I offered her half of my sandwich because she was hungry, and I offered her shelter from the rain." Lily, terrified by the angry woman, buried her face in Ethan's side, her small sobs muffled by his shirt. The sound seemed to break Clara's paralysis. "No, Mommy," Clara cried, stepping out from behind Ethan. "He was nice. I was hungry and he shared his food. And Lily's my friend." Isabella's gaze flickered to her daughter, her expression softening for a microsecond before hardening again as she looked back at Ethan. The protective maternal instinct, twisted by fear and privilege, saw only the worst-case scenario. "Marcus," she said without looking away from Ethan, "get his information. I want a full background check run. I want to know everything about him." "There's no need for that," Ethan said, his own temper beginning to fray. "I haven't done anything wrong." "That will be for me to decide," she retorted. "You were alone with my daughter for over an hour. You will tell me exactly what happened, step by step." It felt like an interrogation. Ethan, trying to keep his composure for the sake of the children, recounted the events simply and honestly. Finding Clara on the bench, the shared lunch, the conversation, the walk to the security office when the rain started. As he mentioned the sandwich, Isabella's eyes narrowed. It sounded preposterous. A fabrication. People like him didn't just give things away. They always wanted something in return. "A sandwich," she scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's true," Clara insisted, her voice rising. "He tore his part in half for me. His tummy was rumbling, I heard it. He gave me his food, Mommy." The raw, desperate honesty in her daughter's voice finally pierced Isabella's armor of suspicion. She looked at Clara, then at the other little girl crying quietly, and then back at Ethan. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as a predator, but as a tired-looking man who was clearly trying to protect two scared children. Marcus, who had been observing silently, stepped forward and spoke quietly to Isabella. "Ma'am, Officer Gus confirms the man's story. He brought the girl here as soon as the rain started. He's been cooperative." Isabella's shoulders sagged slightly, the rigid anger giving way to a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The adrenaline that had been fueling her for the past 2 hours vanished, leaving behind the nauseating residue of fear and the bitter taste of her own assumptions. She knelt, opening her arms to her daughter. "Clara, come here." Clara hesitated, looking from her mother's strained face to Ethan's kind, worried one. Then she ran into her mother's embrace, burying her face in her shoulder. Isabella held her tight, her eyes closing as she inhaled the scent of her child's hair, reassuring herself that she was real. She was safe. "I was so scared, baby," Isabella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was scared too," Clara mumbled into her mother's suit. "But Ethan and Lily took care of me." Over her daughter's head, Isabella's eyes met Ethan's. The fire was gone from her gaze, replaced by a complex mixture of relief, confusion, and a dawning, uncomfortable sense of shame. She had stormed in here ready to destroy a man who had shown her daughter a kindness she herself had failed to provide that day. She stood up, pulling Clara with her. The room was suddenly quiet, save for Lily's lingering sniffles. The power dynamic had shifted from confrontation to a deeply awkward social impasse. Here they were, the billionaire, her security detail, and the day laborer who had just been treated like a criminal for an act of charity. Isabella started, the word thank you feeling foreign and inadequate on her tongue. I'm glad you found her. It was a weak acknowledgement, a corporate statement rather than a heartfelt expression of gratitude. Ethan simply nodded, pulling Lily into his arms and stroking her hair. I'm just glad she's safe with her mom. He wanted to leave. He wanted to take Lily home, make her some warm pasta, and forget this whole bizarre, humiliating afternoon. He turned to go, his encounter with the world of the wealthy apparently over. Wait, Isabella said, her voice stopping him at the door. He turned back. My daughter said you gave her your food, Isabella stated, more a confirmation than a question. I'd like to compensate you for your trouble. She reached into her purse, her hand going for her wallet. The gesture, so natural to her, was a profound insult to him. He had just been implicitly accused of being a kidnapper, and now she was offering to pay him off like a valet. Ethan's jaw tightened. A quiet, steely pride, the only currency he had left, rose up in him. That won't be necessary, ma'am, he said, his voice cold and firm. It was a sandwich, not a business transaction. My daughter and I need to get home. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, holding Lily close. He stepped out into the damp, clean air of the fading storm, leaving Isabella Romano standing in a stunned silence, her hand frozen halfway to her purse. She was a woman who could put a price on anything, but she had just been confronted by an act of decency that was, to her astonishment, not for sale. The silence in the security office after Ethan's departure was deafening. Isabella stood motionless, the weight of his quiet refusal settling upon her. He hadn't been angry or loud, he had been dignified, and his dignity made her feel cheap. Marcus cleared his throat gently. Ms. Romano, the car's waiting. Isabella didn't move. She was replaying the scene in her head, her own harsh words echoing with cringeworthy clarity. What did you offer her? Candy? The accusation felt like acid in her mouth. She had seen a man in worn clothes with her pristine daughter, and her mind, conditioned by a world of threat assessments and transactional relationships, had leaped to the darkest possible conclusion. Clara tugged on her sleeve. Mommy, can we go home? Yes, baby, of course. Isabella's voice was soft, distracted. As they turned to leave, her eyes fell on the small metal wastebasket in the corner of the room. Peeking out from under a coffee cup lid was a piece of crumpled wax paper, the wrapping from Ethan's sandwich. Next to it was the crinkled paper wrapper from the oatmeal cookies. On impulse, she walked over and pulled the wax paper from the bin. She smoothed it out. It was from a loaf of store-brand bread, the cheapest kind. A few crumbs of peanut butter and a faint purple smudge of jelly were all that remained. She held the flimsy piece of paper in her hand, and it felt heavier than a gold bar. This was the proof. This was the receipt for an act of pure, uncalculated kindness. A man who, by the looks of him, counted every penny, had torn his own meager meal in half for a stranger's child. Her child. The thought was both humbling and deeply shaming. All day, Isabella had been moving millions of dollars, acquiring companies, and building her empire. All, she told herself, for Clara's future. But in the moment her daughter had actually needed someone, when she was hungry and scared, Isabella and her empire were absent. A man with nothing had given her daughter everything he had. She looked down at Clara. He was hungry too, you said. Clara nodded solemnly. I heard his tummy grumble. It sounded like a grumpy bear. The image was so vivid, so childlike and honest, that it cut through Isabella's last defense. The formidable CEO finally cracked. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, mingling with the raindrops already there. It wasn't a tear of relief or of fear, but of a profound and startling self-awareness. Her entire life was optimized for success, but she had failed a fundamental human test. She provided security but not safety. She provided for, but she did not nurture. She had sent a nanny with a video camera to the school play. Ethan Cole had shared his last sandwich. "Marcus," she said, her voice now quiet and resolute, "the background check you were running on Mr. Cole, I still want it, but the objective has changed. It is no longer an investigation. It is research. I want to know everything about him, but not for the reasons I thought. I want to know who he is." "Of course, Ms. Romano," Marcus replied, sensing the seismic shift in his employer. "And get the details of his daughter, too," she added softly. "Lily, was it?" Holding Clara's hand, Isabella walked out of the park office and into the waiting black car. As the driver pulled away, she stared out the window at the rain-washed city, the crumpled wax paper still clutched in her hand. She had come to the park to retrieve her lost daughter, but she was leaving with something else entirely, a jarring and unwelcome glimpse of her own poverty of spirit. The journey home was silent, but Isabella's mind was roaring. A simple peanut butter sandwich had just forced a complete audit of her life, and the balance sheet was not in her favor. Meanwhile, on a bus rumbling across town, Ethan held a sleeping Lily in his arms. The humiliation of the encounter had faded, replaced by a weary resignation. It was just another reminder of the chasm between his world and theirs. He was a footnote in their dramatic day, a strange anecdote they might tell once before forgetting him completely. He looked down at Lily's peaceful face and felt a surge of love so fierce it almost hurt. Maybe he couldn't give her designer coats or pony lessons, but he was there. He showed up. He shared his sandwich. Tonight he'd read her 2 bedtime stories instead of 1. In his world, that was what mattered. He was still hungry, his stomach an empty pit, but he felt a quiet certainty that he was the richer man. He just didn't know that the woman in the black car was, for the first time, beginning to agree with him. 2 days later, Ethan received a call from an unknown number. He was on a ladder, patching drywall, and almost didn't answer. "Is this Ethan Cole?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "Speaking," Ethan said, balancing his phone between his ear and shoulder. "My name is Amanda Shaw. I'm the executive assistant to Ms. Isabella Romano, CEO of Romano Enterprises. Ms. Romano has requested a meeting with you at your earliest convenience." Ethan almost dropped his phone. A meeting? He imagined he was being summoned to be served with a restraining order, or perhaps to sign a non-disclosure agreement. "What is this regarding?" "Ms. Romano would prefer to discuss it in person. We can send a car for you. Would tomorrow at 10 a.m. be suitable?" Against his better judgment, curiosity and a sliver of apprehension made him agree. The next morning, a sleek black car, the same model that had been at the park, pulled up in front of his rundown apartment building. The driver, dressed in a sharp suit, opened the door for him. Ethan, wearing his only pair of decent khakis and a clean but faded button-down shirt, felt like an imposter as he slid onto the plush leather seats. The Romano Enterprises tower was an intimidating spear of glass and steel. He was escorted to the top floor, through an office that felt more like a modern art gallery than a workplace. Amanda Shaw, polished and polite, led him into Isabella Romano's office. Isabella was standing by the window, but she turned as he entered. Today she was dressed in a tailored crimson dress, the picture of power and grace. There was no trace of the frantic, rain-soaked mother from the park. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a chair opposite her large minimalist desk. "Ethan is fine," he said, sitting down. The chair was more comfortable than his bed. "Ethan," she acknowledged, a hint of nervousness in her eyes that surprised him. "I wanted to apologize. My behavior at the park was inexcusable. When a mother believes her child is in danger, she doesn't always think clearly. I misjudged you, and for that, I am truly sorry." The apology was direct and sincere. It disarmed him. "Apology accepted. I understand you were scared." "I was," she admitted, "but that's not the only reason I asked you here." She slid a file across the desk. "My head of security is very thorough. This is your file." Ethan's stomach clenched. "Don't worry," she said quickly. "It's not what you think. I read it. I know about your wife, Sarah. I'm sorry for your loss. I know you were an architect at Peterson and Klein, and I know you've been taking any work you can get to make ends meet for your daughter." She paused, taking a breath. "What I did in that park office, offering you money, was an insult. It was my way of trying to balance a debt, to close a transaction. But what you did for Clara wasn't a transaction. It was a human connection. You reminded me of something I've allowed myself to forget in the years since my own husband passed. She pushed another document across the desk. It wasn't a file. It was a blueprint. This is the preliminary design for the Romano Foundation's new community center, she explained. It's a project we're funding in the very neighborhood you live in. It will have a daycare, an after-school arts program, and a job training facility. The original designs are uninspired. They were designed by a firm that doesn't understand what it's like to need a place like this. She looked him directly in the eye. I read that your thesis was on sustainable, community-focused urban design. You understand what's needed. You have the skill, and you clearly have the heart. I'm not offering you a handout, Ethan. I'm offering you a job. I want you to be the lead architect on this project. Ethan was stunned into silence. He stared at the blueprints, then back at her. It was everything he'd ever dreamed of doing. Designing buildings that helped people, that built communities. It was a lifeline not just to solvency, but back to himself, to the man he was before grief and hardship had stripped him down to pure survival. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Say you'll think about it, she said with a small smile. The salary will be more than sufficient to take care of you and Lily, and the project director has already been instructed to ensure the work schedule allows for a father to be present for his daughter's school plays. The final sentence was delivered with a quiet, knowing significance. It was an acknowledgement of her own failings and a promise of a different way forward. A week later, Ethan Cole walked onto the future site of the Romano Community Center, not as a day laborer, but as its chief architect. He had a contract in his briefcase, and for the first time in 2 years, a profound sense of hope. That Saturday, he and Lily were back in Maple Creek Park. They were having a picnic, but this time, the blanket was covered with food, a whole sandwich for each of them, a bag of chips, apples, and 2 large oatmeal cookies. As Lily was chasing the pigeons, a familiar voice called out, "Lily!" It was Clara, holding the hand of her mother. They were dressed in casual weekend clothes, and Isabella looked younger, less severe. "We were hoping we might find you here," Isabella said to Ethan, a genuine warmth in her smile. Clara ran over to Lily, and the 2 girls immediately started chattering like old friends. Ethan and Isabella stood watching them, a comfortable silence between them. "She's a good kid," Ethan said, nodding towards Clara. "She's better when I'm here," Isabella replied quietly. "You taught me that." She held up a small paper bag. We brought dessert." She handed him the bag. Inside were 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. They were made on artisanal sourdough bread with what was probably organic peanut butter and hand-crushed raspberry preserves. They were objectively, by all culinary standards, 100 times better than the one he had shared, but both of them knew they would never be as valuable. Ethan smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "I think we have more than enough, but I'd be happy to share." And as the 2 fathers and their daughters finally sat down on the soft, sun-warmed grass to share a humble yet heartfelt meal together, the seemingly unbridgeable chasm between their very different worlds didn't appear so impossibly wide after all. In that quiet, unguarded moment, it had been gently bridged not by wealth, power, or grand gestures, but by the simple, profound, and truly priceless gift of a shared sandwich. An offering that carried with it kindness, humanity, and the timeless reminder that connection often begins in the smallest acts of care. In the end, Ethan Cole's story reminds us that the greatest acts of generosity often come not from our abundance, but from what little we have. His simple act of sharing a sandwich wasn't about charity, it was about seeing another person's humanity, even when his own struggles were overwhelming. And for Isabella Romano, it was a powerful lesson that all the money in the world can't buy the warmth of a genuine human connection. Their story proves that kindness is a universal language, spoken and understood by everyone, from the construction site to the boardroom. It has the power to bridge any divide, heal wounds we didn't know we had, and remind us that sometimes the most valuable thing we can offer someone is simply a seat on our bench and a piece of what we have. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of a simple act of kindness, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Ethan's situation? We love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear this message today, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for listening.